I'm from the generation of like 9/11, and a lot of the girls I went to school with didn't know Muslims, and they're talking about Muslims, and I'm like, what? Like, I went to school with like a kid, Adil and Osama, and I'm like, Osama's a great person. Like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. Things like that, where I saw the value in my education and the diversity because I got to appreciate so many different cultures.
And was it athletics alone? Well, I know there's always education, but was athletics one of the reasons or for going to McDonogh that brought you there, or was it straight up academic and the sports took care of themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I was first grade when I went. Nobody's worried about athletics when you're 6.
You'd be surprised.
No, not my mom. Not my mom. So, I went to McDonogh. My mother went to Friends School and Seton Keogh, and my uncles went to BL, so that was out of the question. Couldn't go to BL. And
that's boys Latin for those listening.
Yes, it's an all boys school. So it was about, I could have gone to St. Paul's. I grew up Episcopal, and that was an Episcopal school. But a lot of the other private schools in Baltimore are all girls, and I think, I visited. I'm 6 or 5. I just enjoyed the vibe where I made friends with, everybody. I wasn't really limited to just girls or a small school or those weird uniforms at NDP. Shout out to my NDP friends. But yeah, like it just felt like my vibe. I enjoyed it, even at an early age.
When you do recruiting right now, correct? Is it part of your job too?
Yeah, that's probably the most important part of my job.
Well, let's get into that because, you definitely, you're very intuitive, the way you talk about that's my field, this is my place, and I like that. So how does that come into play when you are recruiting? Because they've changed the rules now, fortunately, so now we've got it up, closer to being 17 than 14 on the girls' side. But what's that experience like when you're trying to meet these girls and presenting them a big decision that's several years in the future, or a couple years at least?
I mean, it's wild because I try to remember my own recruiting experience and, place myself in their shoes. And, but as a coach, I know that I try to actually find girls who, okay, this is going to sound crazy, but I try to find girls that don't necessarily think that they're a fit for George Mason. Like, as a coach, you're constantly trying to improve and better the lacrosse environment. So, not everybody's heard of George Mason, and it's my job to kind of introduce a lot of people to it and bring them on campus and be like, yeah, isn't this cool? Isn't this great? Isn't this team so fun? And they're like, yeah, I didn't even know about it. Like, I would have never considered it. Where I get so many kids that kind of write me and they're like, I think I'm a great fit for George Mason. And I'm like, well, typically you're not. If you think you're a fit for the George Mason right now, that's not what I'm coaching, like recruiting for. I literally recruit for the George Mason of the future, if that kind of makes sense. Mm-hmm. Where you kind of get kids that aren't necessarily a fit, but at the same time, they have to fit into your system. They have to fit in academically. I kind of, just like my academic and athletic career, they're the same to me. If you're not really trying to push yourself or challenge yourself academically, then I don't think you'll be trying to challenge yourself athletically. So I try to get kids that kind of have that balance.
And when you say, what do people think? I guess, what is the difference? I so you're looking for balance, but when they assume they know the school, but you're looking for something that's not quite there, is it in the lifestyle? What is it that you're looking for?
At George Mason, it could be a number of things. Just because, George Mason isn't like really your typical college experience to me. It doesn't have football. It's in Northern Virginia. Yeah, I'm just going to tell you like the perception. It's the largest state school in Virginia, so it's big, on paper. It's a basketball school, so that's, can be weird for some kids. I went to UVA because I had big semi-big football. You know, I'm really an LSU fan, but it's big enough football for me to watch. And then, you know, big ACC basketball, you can win a national championship. Like, those are different drivers. You know, I was a different type of recruit, where at George Mason, I'm trying to get a kid that really wants to build a program, maybe could go to a big program, but kind of wants to come to George Mason and be a star, you know, a featured athlete. Doesn't mind that we don't have football, is academically centered, and, you know, it's not a rage out college town. It's kind of where you're going to be focused on lacrosse and academics, pretty much. And you're going to get a really good job after it, because you're in the heart, you're in the suburbs of DC. There's tons of internship opportunities, things that weren't really on my radar when I was looking for a university. I think George Mason offers a lot of like great things in that department.
And I think you just talk about some of the great things that being a student athlete in college offers. And to parents, it may not be the place you thought, because more, like you say, more likely you're thinking of big football schools.
Right.
And whether it's lacrosse or any other sport, when your kid finds an opportunity, you definitely want to kind of see where it goes. And strangely, the way you described your situation was my oldest daughter, who is a sophomore now at Boston University. She was a very good athlete in high school, but she said, no, I'm just going to be, and I say just, a student at BU.
Oh, right.
And the funny part is, she said she would, the way you're describing the school, for those that don't know BU, it's in Boston. You can see the lights of Fenway Park, and there is no football team. And so, but she had swore when she was at the wise age of 17 that she would only go to schools that you'd see on big time football every Saturday. You just knew they would always be on TV. And so we were driving around to colleges. We hit a few in Boston, because there's a few there, if you haven't heard. And I said, well, let's pull over here. And the meter was open, and I showed her BU. She said, what is this place? I said, it's BU. It's a really good school. And that's all I knew about it. And she just thought I was crazy. And then we visited one more time. Then she got in. She visited again. She talks about how it wasn't until the third visit, when she'd been accepted student, that she actually began to like it. And by Halloween of that first year, she said, do I have to come home for Christmas? Because it was that vibe. And again, she found her team. She just got really into her classes, wanted to do a double minor, all these things. Found, again, really diverse group of friends. And she's a city girl. You know, she grew up in the South, Atlanta and Jacksonville. And just the way you describe it is, if you knew what you wanted, well, there wouldn't be the fun in discovering things, would it?
Right.
And I think just the way that's what sport is doing for the way you're recruiting. I think it's a bigger door you're opening for them than just sports, for them to really see, again, this different setting.
For sure.
So, with that said, though, you talked about how, again, from your perspective, you know, some schools are very diverse. This was a big article you wrote. You talked about the state of race in lacrosse. So what's the message, or what was it that really first made you want to start talking about that boldly? Some really excellent articles in Lacrosse Magazine, and so forth.
Well, you know, they were asking me to write on something, and I couldn't think of anything. And at the last moment, I just decided to write on what I know best, you know, where maybe my experience is unique, and maybe other people can relate to this. And it was kind of like a poem to me. And I just kind of rambled on about, you know, told the story and told of my experience. And it was just like, I don't remember what that type of poem would be, but like a rambling thought, one long prose. So that's what it was. And it kind of like became a hit.
And I mentioned to you that, and I've got the article in front of me right here. It probably is, I guess you call it a long poem. It is beautifully concise. It is not meant to, I think, upset anybody. It's to the point. And you talked about some things that some people don't realize. You mentioned about your coaches and teammates for supporting you, even if they didn't know you had struggles and things like that. Did you have silent struggles, and do you think they noticed as they were helping you, or is it just they saw you as, the person you are regardless of color because they got to know you through sports?
I don't know any college kid that doesn't have struggles. Right. So, yeah, I don't think I was unique in that. I think maybe my struggles were specific to me, being a woman of color, being, a gay woman of color, like, let's add everything on top of it. So struggling with that in general was a lot. You're trying to find yourself. You're trying to figure out everything on top of passing your English class and being the best athlete you can be. So it was a struggle. But I think, UVA has a lot of great young women in its program, and, we kind of helped each other figure life out in those years. So,
well, what about now because again, do you also work for U.S. Lacrosse? 'Cause I know you're at the convention this year. Do you work for them, or you just collaborate with them sometimes?
I think you could call it a collaboration. Yeah.
And that's a whole different circuit now, because that brings in, all the different levels of rec and high school as an audience for you. So what do you see from that perspective now, where you're not with, again, your support group that you had at UVA, but in terms of just looking at the different programs, the different coaches that come in, and some of the players? Do you have any other perspective on it from that angle?
I mean, my perspective is that I get phone calls almost daily from, parents all across the country, from other coaches, saying, you went through this. Can you give me advice? Or can you help me? Or can you point me in the right direction? And I know that I'm kind of a resource for a lot of people. And on my hardest days, when I'm like, oh my God, coaching is so hard, this is so difficult, I kind of look to that and say, I kind of have to do what I'm here to do, because I think a lot of people are kind of counting on it. And a lot of young girls need this in the sport. They need someone to kind of say, well, she did it, just like there were women for me. I remember Jasmine Norton went to UNC from McDonogh before me, and she might not know it, but I looked to her and I was like, man, she went to Carolina. Like, that's so great. And she was such a great defender, and I looked up to her, and I'm sure she had somebody to look up to. So it's really important that we have representation in the sport and in even the coaching world. I think it helps a lot.
What are some of the, I guess without revealing too much, because I know they place their confidence in you, the people that call you and say, can you help me? How did you get through this? What are the things that people are feeling the need to, reach out to someone like yourself, to go beyond their parents or their friends and say, no, we got to talk to her. Hey, how did she get through this? What are the issues that they're bringing up to you?
It's mostly a lot of, my kid feels insecure, or feels that she's going to stick out, or she's going to feel different. And I try to tell them that she is going to stick out, and she is going to be different. And it's important that she, knows that, and still can perform, and still can be her best person. And it's important that you teach your young daughter to communicate and articulate, what she's feeling to the proper people. And, I just try to teach them how to be strong young women in the midst of, because if you don't learn how to do it in this small lacrosse world, how are you going to learn to do it in the large global world? So it's just lessons that you have to teach.
and that's why we play.